otherwise known as my Night of Repentance, as I like to call it, where I go through everything that I got right and wrong in the previous week of fantasy football. So obviously, week 2 just wrapped up. I'm going through what I got right and wrong in week 2 fantasy football, and it was a really interesting week. I mean, it was a crazy week. It was another crazy week of football, and I'm glad that we're all still right at the beginning because I'm already having so much fun with everything. So if you enjoyed this segment that I do, it's important for me to provide transparency. And that's really why I do it live as well, so you guys can see the raw reaction to it rather than like an edited down version, because I do think it's really important to show you guys the raw emotions that come with being right and wrong. So make sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel to show your support if you appreciate this segment that I do every single week. So before I do that, let me just get into this Monday night game that we just watched. So that game was an interesting one. That was a really interesting one. It wasn't my favorite game of the week because there wasn't a ton of like the Sunday night game. I really enjoyed that game. That game was super physical, and this game was good. Like, we had some good fantasy performances from Devonta Smith coming through. Bijan Robinson looked good. Saquon looked good for a little bit until the last minute, but overall, like, there was some good performances. But I gotta hand it to Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins really came through tonight. You know, that last drive when he was given the opportunity by Saquon Barkley, I mean, he's got to be kicking himself over dropping that last second pass. I mean, that was really bad. You know, that was really bad stuff. Obviously, it cost him the game and gave him the opportunity. Stopped the clock too. I mean, they gave them like a minute and 45 seconds, I think, by the time they had kicked the field goal and, you know, kicked the ball back to the Falcons. Kirk was cool, calm, and collected on that last drive. I was really impressed with Kirk on that last drive. I remember I was just kind of like talking out loud, and I was like, he's got no chance. Like, I know Kirk is not going to do this on Monday night in Philadelphia, and he marched right down there. I mean, there was no hiccup in that drive whatsoever. So congratulations to Kirk. Hats off to him. I'm always a Kirk doubter, especially in primetime games. You'll see it tomorrow on the defense ranking video as well. But otherwise, you know, Saquon obviously played pretty well for the majority of that game. Didn't get in the end zone by like an inch, literally, and didn't have as good of a game as he did last week, obviously. But tonight's game was interesting, so I just wanted to cover really quick. But let's go through what I got right and wrong this week. So this is one that I feel pretty good saying, because obviously it's just one game. But when I told everybody on my buy low video last week, Marvin Harrison Jr. is a great buy low, I think a lot of people didn't take that seriously. I think a lot of people didn't. And what's really interesting to me is seeing the how fast things flip when football is being played, right? Because as I always say, football moves every day is like a year. When the football season is actually happening, which it makes it really fun, right? It makes it really fun. You have to catch up, and like your head starts spinning sometimes if you're new to it, obviously. And even for someone who's been watching and playing football for most of his life, myself, like it still is moving really fast for me during the season as well. You definitely have to keep a level head. And when Marvin Harrison Jr. came out and did basically next to nothing in his week 1 game, I said, guys, pump the brakes. Like this guy is a rookie playing in his first NFL game. Now, I really like the player, and I thought he was going to be immediately effective, which didn't work out in week 1. But I said, just because of his draft price, people are panicking, and people are actually willing to sell this guy. Like, the amount of people that were like, should I sell Marvin for, like, you know, Brian Thomas Jr.? It's like, no. Like, absolutely not. Don't do that. And so when I came out and I said Marvin Harrison is like a prime buy low, some people had objections to it, which I found really interesting because this is, again, a dude played bad on his first NFL game. Not even played bad, wasn't involved. So what? Like, first NFL game in an 18-week season, and he doesn't play well. This week, obviously, Marv goes off. I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. was absolutely outrageous just yesterday against the Los Angeles Rams. Let's pull up Marvin's stats Marvin had 8 targets, 4 receptions, 130 yards on 4 receptions, 32.5 yards per reception, and 2 receiving touchdowns for 27 points in a half PPR format. Marvin was elite, and this is the thing. Just walk it through yourself and ask yourself the question out loud. Was Greg Dortch ever really going to be the long-term wide receiver 1? Of course not. Was it ever going to be Michael Wilson? Of course not. Was Trey McBride going to out-target Marvin all year? Obviously, I guess that remains to be seen to a certain extent, but that's not going to happen. Marvin Harrison Jr. was drafted top 5 for a reason. This dude's going to be the wide receiver 1, and I mean, really the encouraging part about it is that Kyler looked really good against the Rams. That dude, he is so, like, he's hearing about the Bryce Young news today. Obviously, if you guys, I'm sure most of you have heard, Bryce Young got benched by the Carolina Panthers, and Andy Dalton's going to be starting in week 3. Just looking at those two dudes, like, obviously Kyler is short, but Bryce Young doesn't have, like, half the physical gifts that Kyler has. Like, Kyler is not only, like, he's short, but he's definitely beefy enough to withstand punishment. He's also freaking fast. That dude can move around the pocket. He's got a great arm, launches it deep, accurate. Like, that guy, he's really, really talented. So you want to, like, this is what I was saying before the season. Never have I ranked a rookie wide receiver as high as I ranked Marvin, because usually rookie wide receivers that are as elite as Marvin was as a prospect, they're going to bad teams with bad quarterbacks. Like, Marvin fell into the perfect situation in the top 5. He got Kyler Murray because the Cardinals had a bad year because he missed half the year. So this situation with Marvin, I hope you bought low on him because that time is up. Nobody's selling you Marvin Harrison Jr. for undervalue right now. Now, here's something I got really wrong. And Ethan O'Black, I see your super chat. I appreciate it. I'm going to hold all questions to the end. So any questions, any super chats will be held at the end of what I got right and wrong segment. One thing I got really wrong, and I know I wasn't alone on this one, but, you know, I don't like to play the numbers game. Like, I made the call. I don't, whenever I rank players, I don't really care what anybody else ranks them at. Like, I go with what I see, what I research, and what my gut tells me. Colby Parkinson was a disaster. And I really, this one pisses me off, to be honest with you guys, because Colby Parkinson was never a guy that I was, like, really wild on. Like, heading into the year, even with the news that, like, and Tyler Higbee was never going to play the start of the year, but obviously when he went, you know, officially on the IR, it's like, okay, well, who's our option here for the next 4 weeks? And everybody's went to Colby Parkinson acting like he was going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. Maybe that's an over-exaggeration, but I wasn't on board in week 1. He ended up having a pretty good game in week 1, and I ended up ranking him inside of, like, the top 7 of my tight ends last week. I mean, I am so mad that I ended up sticking with that, because Colby Parkinson, like, if you actually look at his career numbers, this dude has been a blocking tight end for basically his entire career. I mean, he has done nothing in the receiving game the past several years of his career. So that game against the Lions on Sunday night in week 1, that was like his best game to date, basically, of his NFL career. And I saw the opportunity with Puka out, and I was like, this just seems like a good pick. And the matchup against the Cardinals, I was like, I like the matchup. Colby Parkinson will probably not be back inside. It's really hard to say, man, because, like, I really want to say I'm kicking him to the curb, but I can't. Like, they just lost Cooper Kupp. And Cooper Kupp, I don't know if he's going to the IR officially yet. Last time I saw that he was a candidate for the IR, which usually means, like, he's probably going to the IR. But I don't know if it's officially happened yet. So I think that it's hard to count Parkinson out with 2 wide receivers gone for at least the next 3 weeks. And likely longer. So I just really, it's hard. I'm going to have to really evaluate this one. But I'm really struggling with the Rams receiving core right now. Like, what their target options are, it's not good. And Colby Parkinson, I think, just proved what I ultimately believed was right, but backed out on, which is that Colby Parkinson is just not a very good receiving option as a tight end, and that's going to have to take into account moving forward. Here's something I got right, and there was a lot of defensive calls that I made that were right, but this one felt particularly good. The Jets defense, I ended up getting that one pretty right. And really one of my rationales, there was two rationales I made for having the Jets defense inside the top 10. And nobody really argued with me on this. So I'm not like grandstanding up here like I'm right and you were all wrong. Like, that's not the point of this segment here. Point is to be transparent. The two things I said about the Jets defense were that the Jets defense, number one, was going to be really mad coming into this game against the Titans because they got embarrassed on Monday night in week 1. They got thoroughly embarrassed on defense. They come out, they have, and then the second part was that the Titans, man, Will Levis, like, that's another topic for another day. I'm not going to get too into it, but that dude has talent. He just makes really boneheaded mistakes. Like that early in the game, like before halftime, he took points off the board for them. I mean, they were down there in inside the 20, and it was like 3rd and 4, and he was getting brought down for a sack, and he just had to try to make something happen and tossed it back to his running back who was behind him. So obviously that's a fumble. So the running back, I think it was Pollard at the time, didn't get it. It was a low pitch that Levis did, and literally took points off the board. And really moving forward, any defense that plays the Titans is going to get, at the very least, strong consideration for being inside the top 12 for me. Because, again, Levis is talented. Like, if you watched Levis the past 2 weeks, and even last year, you can see talent there. There's something there. He makes really good throws. He's got a really strong arm, and he's athletic. But this guy is a mistake-prone dude that dates back to his days at Kentucky. So the Jets defense to me was just like a pretty safe call and one that had upside. Now, I want to say the Jets defense, I wasn't super impressed when it all was said and done. But obviously they maintained good fantasy production in that game because they were able to get after Will Levis and they were able to make him turn the ball over. So the Jets defense actually ended up doing pretty well. But that was one that I did feel good about in this particular week. Now, staying on defense, this was one that I was fighting myself on this one. I really was fighting myself on this one when I was ranking them. And when I saw that the Jags defense was going up against the Browns, and I had just watched both teams, and the Jags defense looked bad against the Dolphins, and the Browns offense, I mean, it still looks anemic, but it looked even worse in Dallas. In Cleveland versus Dallas, I would say. This Browns offense was so bad that I was like, I have to put the Jags inside the top 12 this week. Oh, man. Boy, was I wrong. I mean, the Jaguars defense is just, it's an embarrassment, actually. In side note, I think their head coach, Doug Peterson, that's a guy I've always really liked historically in the past. I think he's not for long in Jacksonville. This team looks bad. I mean, they just look lethargic, and they look like they won't get up to play, and this was a close game. The Browns didn't score 20 points, and the Jags defense had 3 fantasy points in most platforms. I mean, just an embarrassment. The fact that they couldn't get more than a couple sacks against Deshaun Watson. The fact that they couldn't get a turnover or 2 against Deshaun Watson, it's honestly an embarrassment. So the Jaguars defense, they're honestly an embarrassment. The Jags team is an embarrassment right now. I mean, they had Evan Ingram missing. Christian Kirk's, he's cooked. I mean, I'm pretty willing to say that. Christian Kirk is cooked. ETN didn't look fantastic either. Another touchdown saved his week. Tank Bigsby got injured, obviously. This offense is lethargic on the Jags, and the defense is just an embarrassment. So this Jags defense, you'll be hard-pressed to get them inside my top 12 again. So I guess, spoiler alert, they won't be inside my top 12 defenses for sure this week because it's an embarrassing team. It's a really embarrassing defense. The fact that they couldn't put up more than 3 points against the Browns, they should be ashamed of themselves. And I don't feel good about it. I feel really stupid for putting the Jags inside my top 12. So that's how I feel about that one. One that's going to make me feel pretty positive, and it might shock a little bit of people. For those of you who've been with my channel from literally like the beginning of 2023. So at that time I had like 2,000 subscribers or something like that. Not as big as I am now. And by the way, thank you guys. I appreciate the support. As always, love you guys. But I've been on this guy for the entire time since he was coming out of college. And I feel like I've been really right the entire way. Quinton Johnston. Quinton Johnston, if anybody in this chat right now or anybody watching was subscribed to my channel back then and was watching my videos back in early 2023, you'll remember me being lower on Quinton Johnston than a lot of consensus. I just didn't see it with him. Like, he looked raw. He looked like he only worked on a couple plays. And I was just like, this guy reminds me of Mike Williams because, Mike Williams took him like 3 or 4 years to finally do well in fantasy. And I was like, I think if he ends up working, it's going to be years down the road. And obviously, like, he was so horrible last year. Like, it literally, people were so turned off by Johnston last year that it was like, I felt good because I got it right. And I was like, Quinton Johnston's not going to be good this year. Like, he's not going to be a good player in fantasy. And obviously he wasn't. So heading into the offseason, like, there was not even really a discussion. Like, people were just, like, throwing him to the trash. And I said, hold up a second, guys. Like, on my Dynasty channel, Dynasty Fanalysts, I said, hold on a second, guys. This guy was a first-round pick, got drafted to a team that had an atrocious head coach and coaching staff in general. That team culture there last year was abysmal. And literally, the players staged a coup against Brandon Staley last year to get him out of the building. That's why they lost by like 60 points to the Raiders on Thursday night. That was a coup. And that was the players telling Brandon Staley, we're not playing for you anymore. So they get rid of Brandon Staley, right? And then they bring in Harbaugh this year. And I said, hold on a minute, guys. First round draft capital, talented player, gets stability at the coaching position and a good offensive coordinator with Greg Roman. Something smells pretty good to me here. And I said he was a buy low in Dynasty. Now, one game is not enough for me to be like he's nowhere near the top 30. Like, when you see the wide receiver rankings tomorrow, you're not going to see Quinton Johnston's name. I'm not that crazy. Like, I make some crazy takes because I like to take swings, but we're not there yet. Against the Steelers, we're just not there yet. But I'm telling you this right now, Quinton Johnston, I would not be surprised if he has a pretty decent season. Somewhere in the range of like 800 yards, 8 to 900 yards, I wouldn't be surprised. Because this guy does provide a downfield element to this team that they don't have with Ladd or with Josh Palmer. And they obviously don't have DJ Chark right now. But this has got good written all over it to me. And I know, like, I already see people in the comments like saying this is a trap. I get it. I see where you're coming from. I've been right about Quinton Johnston up to this point, and I'm going to continue to stick by exactly what I projected for him before he even got drafted, which is that I think with a good coach now, they know how to use him. They know how to use him. They used him correctly in week 1, and they used him correctly in week 2. The culture is much better. Coaching matters. Coaching matters, especially with a player like Johnston who was not a bulletproof prospect. So I see some people like saying it's a trap. I get it. I get where you're coming from, but I feel at least up to this point I've been really right on Quinton Johnston, and I already feel like I'm on the right track again with Quinton Johnston. So I think he should be rostered, but obviously, like, don't start him this week. That's not what I'm trying to tell you guys. The last thing that I got wrong. This one is really an apology for Saints fans and the New Orleans Saints in general. I was so wrong about the Saints this year. I thought the Saints were going to be just a totally abysmal team this year. I thought the Saints were going to be like bottom 5. I really did. I was like, this offense it's stale. They made no moves. The only move they did proved to be the most, oh my gosh. I mean, the one move they did this offseason offensively proved to be the best move that possibly any team made this year as far as a coordinator change. Clint Kubiak coming to New Orleans to be the offensive coordinator has been a godsend for the New Orleans Saints, and specifically Derek Carr. That's who I'm really apologizing to right now, because I was so wrong on Derek Carr. Before the season, I really was in a situation where I was like just writing him off. Like I literally was just writing him off. I was just like, I don't think anybody can work with Derek Carr at this point. I think he's lost. I don't think he's there anymore. I think his confidence is lost. I think he's just not as talented of a player as he used to be. And so as a result, everybody in that offense really got kind of a lower ranking from me, aside from Kamara, because Kamara, the good thing about him is that he's going to receive targets. But I'll tell you this on Kamara, I never expected Kamara to come out and put up 40-plus on the Cowboys in week 2. That's a side note, though. Really, Derek Carr is the one who has looked Derek Carr's been incredible. I mean, Derek Carr through 2 weeks, and again, it's only 2 weeks, but Derek Carr, I didn't know he was capable of it. Derek Carr through 2 weeks has a 77% completion percentage, 443 passing yards on 30 completions, and 5 touchdowns and 1 interception. Quarterback 2 right now in fantasy. That's ridiculous. Like, Derek Carr has literally met his perfect match with Clint Kubiak. So, the one move that they made this offseason, Clint Kubiak, that is proving right now as we speak to be the best move of the entire offseason. As far as coordinators go, this move was incredible for not only Derek Carr, but this entire offense. They look like they have so much energy right now. Like, this offense, Rashid Shaheed's obviously hitting on big plays. Still not getting targeted a bunch, so I'm not super wild on Rashid Shaheed. Like, I'd still prefer Olave in that offense. But, I mean, the reality is, like, Shaheed provides that perfect explosion play and getting the defense to back off that nobody else in this offense can provide. So, I'm really bullish now. Not bullish, I would say. I'm backpedaling. I mean, that's just the reality of this. That's why I do this segment, to show you guys that the Derek Carr Saints with Clint Kubiak as offensive coordinator, they're legit. They're a legit team. I mean, they're legit at this point, and I would say if you have Kamara, obviously you play him. Like, that's not a question. That's not even a sell high to me. Like, Kamara is not a sell high. Kamara's floor is honestly really high, and the ceiling is what we saw yesterday. So I think Kamara is a hold if you have him. Don't sell high. Carr can be played for the foreseeable future. Olave is going to be fine. Shaheed can be played. 2 straight games. Shaheed can be played. So there's lots of pieces in this offense and fantasy that are going to be really relevant. And based on what we've seen from the Saints so far, I mean, this has been a revelation for me. Because I had the Saints nowhere near this good through 2 weeks. So definitely got the Saints and specifically Derek Carr wrong. So that was what I got right and wrong for week 2 fantasy football. Make sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel to show your support. Now we will open it up to some questions. And we're going to start out with Ethan Oblak. And I appreciate the super chat. 10-man PPR. Adam Stevenson for Olave and JT. I think that Adams and Olave are relatively close still in my personal rankings. Like, for the season, I think they're still going to be close. Like, I think Devontae obviously is coming off a massive game, so he's a sell high guy for sure. I'll tell you, the one thing that, like, is kind of making me hesitant on this one is Jonathan Taylor. I'm worried about the Colts. I'm really worried about the Colts. I mean, I watched that game yesterday, and Anthony Richardson is a problem. Some people gave me flack before, like a couple weeks before the season. I watched Anthony Richardson. It was a Thursday night preseason game against the Bengals, I think, and Anthony Richardson was all over the map. I mean, balls were flying everywhere. Sometimes he can hit. Like, he's got an incredible arm. There's no question about that. The question is accuracy. And the reality is, if you don't have an accurate quarterback, everybody from the offense suffers, including the running back. And I got flack for it when I said Anthony Richardson is giving me Justin Fields vibes. And I got flack for it. I'm worried about the Colts. I mean, this is like a separate conversation that we can get into if you guys want to hear my thoughts about the Colts, but I'm worried. I'm worried about the Colts. And that makes me worried about Jonathan Taylor. I mean, because Jonathan Taylor, I think he got in the end zone yesterday again, which, again, saved his week. Let me make sure I'm going to bring up Jonathan Taylor's stats, make sure I got them right. No, JT had a good game yesterday. Yeah, JT had a good game, no touchdown. Yeah, he ended up having a good game. So, I'm still worried about the Colts. Now, when I take it all into account, I think Adams is due for a decline, and I think Stevenson is due for a decline. Whether it's this week or not, like, I think they're both going to decline to some extent. So, for me personally, I think Olave and JT is the side I would take. Because at least with Olave, like, Olave actually has a better quarterback, I think, throwing him the ball. Or much better. I mean, Olave's quarterback is much better than Minshew. So I would take the Olave on between him and Devontae Adams. And with Jonathan Taylor, I would take him over Stevenson, but I got to tell you, I'm a little worried about the Colts. I really, really am. So I think as the weeks go on with the Colts, I'm going to be really evaluating and watching this team, because how they respond over the next 2 weeks in particular, I think is going to tell a lot about their season. And that's going to, help me decide where I should be ranking Jonathan Taylor at this point. So I would say Jonathan Taylor, a little nerve-wracking, but I would take that side of the trade. And again, appreciate the super chat. Gonna answer several questions tonight, as many as I can, but gotta film tomorrow's video. So if you want your question answered immediately, best way to do that is through super chat. But I appreciate y'all being here either way. We're gonna start out from the top. JT Blue Gops take Quinton Johnston with number 1 waiver position. Also, thoughts on the KC running back room. Good questions. So I obviously got done talking about Quinton Johnston in the What I Got Right and Wrong segment, and I do think it's legit. I do. And again, I know a lot of people are going to have doubts about this one. Understandably so. But I trust my gut on this one, because I've been right up to this point about everything regarding Quinton Johnston. So I think we're about to see a good stretch from Quinton Johnston. Now, that's not to say that he's going to come out and put up good numbers again next week. But I think he's in line. It would not surprise me at all if he had anywhere between 700 to 900 yards receiving this season. And good fantasy games, obviously. So, with Quinton Johnston, it really does depend on who's on the waivers. Because, I don't know what your waiver situation is. If you have someone like a Khalil Shakir on the wire, I would prefer Khalil Shakir, because there's just more upside with the player, I think, and there's more upside in the offense. Now, if you're talking about Quinton Johnston versus Jalen Naylor of the Minnesota Vikings, I would take Quinton Johnston, because he's I think the better player and has more long-term upside than Jalen Naylor does. So it really does depend, right? I'm clearly seeing that you want to get a wide receiver off the waiver wire, and I would say he's probably my number 2 pickup behind Khalil Shakir if he's available. My thoughts on the Kansas City running back room, I just think, with Prince, I'm sorry, not Prince, Carson Steele, watching that game back, that dude, he did nothing to impress me. Now, it's always hard to judge any particular position when they come off the sidelines in the middle of, late in the game. That late in the game, it's hard to judge someone who comes off the sidelines basically the entire game, is cold, has had, literally no way to warm up, really, and judge their performance, right? Like, so he's obviously inefficient. I think he had like 7 carries for 24 yards. Ended up having a fumble, so he had a little less than 0 points. Or a little more than 0 points. So I think that as of right now, and the information that we have, it's really just that I'm leaning towards him because he looks like he will be the carry guy. Now, I'm not certain on this one. Like, I'm not certain on it at all. I think there's a legitimately good chance that the Chiefs sign a running back. I really do think it's a legitimately good chance. Because the Chiefs, there's names out there for sure. But I just think that this running back room, like, Pacheco's going to miss time, obviously. Like, I don't know if he's officially been placed on the IR yet, but it's coming, obviously. Like, everybody knows he's bound for the IR. Now, I don't know enough about the injury. I don't know enough about that timeline to know if he's coming back this season. So, they're going to need to figure it out long term, obviously. So, it would not surprise me in the slightest if they end up, getting somebody off the wire, off free agency, off their couch this week, and say, come on, let's go win a championship. So my ultimate opinion is that I would rather take the shot than not. Like with Jordan Mason is the perfect example. Like, nobody knew last week heading into game time whether McCaffrey was going to get placed on the IR or not. Everybody was just like, Mason was a legitimate last minute pickup for people who were just trying to get a running back in place of McCaffrey, who got ruled out like with the inactives an hour and a half before the game time. So like Mason, and look how it's turned out. Mason's a top 12 guy right now and will be for the foreseeable future. So for me, it's a mindset of just taking the chance that it could hit and running with it, because the Chiefs offense is obviously great. So I'd rather have a situation where I can get a running back on a great team and a great offense, even if it's not for certain. And the best way that we have to look right now is to look at it and say, based on work and opportunities in week 2, it looks like Carson Steele's probably that guy as of right now. So I would rather just take the shot on it personally. Grassy FPS, what's going on? Good to see you in here. Appreciate the super chat. Trade Kyron for Bijan. If not, who could I get? I would, yeah. I mean, if you can get Bijan Robinson, I would get him. Look, Bijan, it's similar to the case that I made for Josh Jacobs today on the buy low. And I want to make it clear. Like, I'll reiterate it. Josh Jacobs is not a buy low in competitive leagues. Like, everybody saw what he did. He's like, you're not going to convince your league mates, like, he sucks, right? Like, if they're paying attention, they know 30 carries means a lot. So, but it's similar with Bijan because he hasn't found the end zone yet this year. And he's had over 100 total scrimmage yards in both weeks. So, Bijan and Kyron, this offense is scary. Like, they're falling apart. And some people may go the other way and look at it at they may look at it as some situation where it's like, with minimal options, Kyron's about to ball out. I can understand that point of view for sure. I'll counter it with this. This offensive line is not good. And they're not protecting Stafford very well. And on top of that, Stafford just lost his 2 best receivers in this offense for extended time. So this offense, like, they're crumbling. They're crumbling really fast. So I do not want to have a running back on a bottom 10 offense, and that's legitimately what we might be looking at here by the time week 4 is over. I think when we look back and look at the first 4 weeks of the year, at the end of week 4, the Rams might be a bottom 10 offense when it's all said and done. So I'm not wild on Kyron right now, man. I'm worried. It's not even about the play, man. Like, he hasn't played particularly well, but I mean, touchdown saved his day yesterday. But at the end of the day, like, this offensive line is not good. And Kyron is struggling right now. So I would rather have Bijan for sure. And if you can't, I mean, I see your comment. other names for Kyren, I think that if you can't get Bijan, I would try to get Jacobs. I would try to get a guy like Josh Jacobs for Kyren. Those are like my top guys that I would try to target in exchange for Kyren. Now, you may or may not be able to get that. You may or may not be able to. So, other names that I probably would consider, if you can get James Conner, I would definitely try to get James Conner. If you could get somebody like a Montgomery, I would try to get Montgomery. If you could get Brian Robinson, I would get Brian Robinson. That's kind of like Brian Robinson may be your floor for guys that you could get. Because I'm worried about Kyren. I really am. So I'm right there with you. I'm not big on Kyren for the next, it's just a bad situation. It's a bad situation that Kyren has found himself in. But obviously, Bijan and Jacobs are my top two. And then the guys that I just listed as well, those are, straight up. Like, that's what I would personally do. Definitely. I just wanted to address something that you did say a little bit ago. Want to talk about the Saints. Just so you know, talked about the Saints. So you want to go back like 15 minutes into this video, you can hear my full thing about how wrong I was on the Saints. So just so you're not disappointed. Because I did go through them. But again, appreciate the super chat. Good to see you in here, Grassy. Julian Castro, what's going on? Garrett Wilson or Rice rest of season? I think that I would take Rice. Rice is the guy that I would take because this is still it's similar to the situation with the Rams where it's like this offense is kind of crumbling a little bit. Like, obviously, Hollywood is really like no big loss, to be honest with you, in my opinion, because Hollywood was never there, right? Like, you can't miss something you didn't have. So, and it's not like he's like was ever going to be the number one. He may have had a role as number 2, number 3, but I mean, that's not a big loss. Pacheco's a big loss. Like, that's going to create a major void and it's going to make them really reliant on Mahomes. But the good thing is that Mahomes is Mahomes. So, like, for me personally, Mahomes might be a buy low this week. Honestly. 2 weeks with, like, 15 points. They're going to throw the ball a lot of the next foreseeable future. So, Rashee Rice is obviously the benefit of that. Now, I would expect Kelsey to have better games. I would expect him to have better games. And I actually almost considered putting Worthy in on my buy low yesterday as well. I think that's a good honorable mention. Or buy low on Xavier Worthy this week, I think it's a good honorable mention. Because this offense without Pacheco is going to lean pass. And obviously he doesn't get in the end zone last week. Had very similar touches, though, and opportunities to what he did in week 1. That's not always going to, obviously, he's not, like, if he hit a touchdown every touch in the NFL, like, he'd be one of the greatest players ever to live. So, like, obviously that was never going to happen. But I think the more the several weeks go on, if he can stay healthy, this dude's going to get really involved. So I think that Xavier Worthy's a good buy low. I think that Mahomes is a good buy low. Rashee Rice, I'm not like, if you have Rashee Rice and Garrett Wilson, I would take Rashee Rice. But I don't know if you'll get Rashee Rice in exchange for Garrett. I think Garrett Wilson is going to be a harder sell with Rashee Rice. Your buy low time for Rashee Rice was over as soon as Thursday night started in week 1. That was it. That was, you had to buy him low in the draft. And it's unfortunate, but again, if you have both of them, like, you're in great position. I would prefer Rashee Rice rest of season for sure. Leon, what's the waiver wire pickups for the week? Went through it on the video today. If you want to go check out that video, I go through like 20 guys that are legitimate pickups this week, depending on position that you need and depending on like how much you prioritize the player. I went through a bunch of them today, so you can go check that video out. Pristine, what's going on? Should I trade Jalen Waddle for Garrett Wilson? Yeah, I would. I would do that because this is something I did discuss it on the buy low video today. With Tyreek Hill, Tyreek is somebody that I have a lot of confidence in just because he's Tyreek Hill. Like, regardless of whether Tua gets placed on the IR or he ends up missing like a game or two, I don't worry about Tyreek Hill because he's one of the best players I've ever seen play football. Now, with Jalen Waddle, not only is he the number 2 in this offense, he's just not as good as Tyreek Hill. I'm very concerned about Waddle. He is going to be very dependent in the next several weeks without Tua on big plays. That's what he's going to be very dependent on. Now, again, I don't know what Tua's timeline is. I mean, they're playing it really smart, which is why I think the Dolphins end up putting him on IR. That's why I truly believe that, because they know that the moment that an injury update on Tua drops, the media is all over it. The media is all over this one. So if they send him out there early again, they're going to get scrutinized to high heaven, right? And, that is what it is. But that's the reality. So they're playing this, they're playing it very cautiously. And they're saying to themselves, hold on a second, we got to be really careful about what our next moves are. And I saw today McDaniel said, it's too early to tell whether we're putting him on IR or not. We don't know what his situation is long term. So I still believe they're going to put him on IR, which makes me really worried for Waddle. I don't think that Waddle is going to have much upside with him out. He'll have upside to a certain extent because he's a good player. And he is a big play guy. But as far as like his floor is really low right now. Like if he doesn't hit on a big play, this guy has like a 3 or 4 point floor. Honestly. So I'm worried about Waddle. I would personally try to get Garrett Wilson. Because the thing about Garrett Wilson, like I said today on the buy low video, is that Garrett Wilson at least has the quarterback in place, and he's the number 1. Like, he's not disappearing in these games. He's making big plays in both games. It just hasn't, like, obviously there's been no touchdown yet, and obviously there hasn't been, like, the monster game. I have faith in the player Garrett Wilson is, and I have faith that Rodgers, by mid-season, is kind of humming a little bit. Now, again, he's not the same player. I didn't expect him to be. But Rodgers is going to be fine. And I think that as a result, Garrett Wilson will stabilize for better fantasy production in the future. So I would personally sell Waddle for Garrett Wilson. We're going to take 3 more questions. And then we're going to sign off for the night because we've got to get to tomorrow's video. So make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you want your question answered, regardless, the best way to do it and to jump the line is to do a super chat. JT Blue Gops, thoughts on the Rams wide receiver room with Kupp now also out? Yeah, it's a mess. I mean, it's a total mess. I went through it on the waiver video today. Like, as far as the receivers go, like, you need to pick at least one of them up out of necessity. Because obviously, like, their top 3 receivers now are going to be a mix, some sort of mix, I would imagine, of Tyler Johnson, Demarcus Robinson, and Tutu Atwell. Like, that's kind of what their mix could be. And I'm sure Jordan Whittington, the rookie, will be mixed in at some point. I don't know how often, but I'm sure he will have a role of some sort. It's a problem for sure. I mean, they don't. It's a clear talent drop when you get past Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. There just is not a third wide receiver that has that amount of talent. It's not like the Texans. Like the Texans, if they theoretically lost Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs, like Tank Dell is going to be great. Tank Dell would be a great fantasy play for the foreseeable future if those guys were to go out. Hopefully they don't, because I have a lot of Nico Collins. But I think ultimately this Rams receiving core is a mess. I sort of like Tutu Atwell, I'll be honest with you. Like, I think that Tyler Johnson, I'm leaning towards him. And obviously targets yesterday don't support that. So I can understand that people lean Demarcus Robinson, for example. Tutu Atwell sneaky. He had several good weeks last year while Cooper Kupp was out. So I think Tutu Atwell is a sneaky player. He's kind of Tutu Atwell is going to be their guy that is going to be getting a lot of shorter and like deeper targets. Like he's a separator. He's a really small dude. He's got speed. He's a great cut. So I think that personally, Tutu is very sneaky. Could be a good best ball play if you're doing weekly best ball drafts on Underdog. Adam Pecoraro, what's going on? Quarterback Lamar, running backs Jacobs, Jones, wide receiver Lamb, J-Mo, tight end Kelsey, flex Laporta. Should I try to trade a tight end for something better? My bench is Ford, Chubb, Addison, Sutton, McLaurin. Love your content, brother. Thanks. Well, I appreciate you being in here. I think that you'll be harder pressed right now to get legitimate value for one of those tight ends. I'm not a big, and obviously, like, I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to belittle your draft strategy because obviously you can't change it. But I'm not a big fan of doing tight end early twice. Like, obviously with both those guys, like, you had to draft them probably back to back, like in the third, fourth round, probably. I'm not a big fan of taking those two tight ends. And the reality is, like, you can see a situation like we're in right now where Kelsey, people are bailing water on Kelsey right now. People are legitimately worried about Kelsey. And with Laporta, he looks not much better. I mean, Laporta has done next to nothing also the first 2 weeks. So Laporta is the guy I would prefer, obviously. But on the trade market right now, like, Kelsey's not going to get you much. Like, for me personally, like, I would wait a week until you get a better game from one of those two, because I do think that ultimately both of those guys will have a good game at some point. Like, they're not all of a sudden just trash, right? Like, I'm not saying they're just trash. Kelsey, I'm more worried about, obviously, because of the age. I've been on this one for over a year. I have not been a fan of Kelsey's draft price, and his fantasy production has backed me up. And it's doing it again. So I'm more worried about Kelsey, but I will say the one thing with Kelsey right now is that he is in a good spot, because without Pacheco, there's going to be an emphasis on this pass game. You can count on that. So Kelsey, I think just by force, becomes more involved through the passing game, because they can't realistically target Rashee Rice like 15, 20 times a game, right? Like, that's not what we're going to see. We're going to see more Xavier Worthy, and we're going to see more Travis Kelsey. So in all likelihood, like, Kelsey could break out as soon as next week. And by that time, that's when for me personally, if one of those guys has the big game, I would wait until Kelsey has the big game and sell him. That's what I believe, because I don't think Kelsey will be as good as Laporta long season. So that's what I would do personally. Last question here. Steven Ensley, what should I do about Pacheco? You got to put him on the IR. It's too early to tell whether or not he's going to play again this year. You don't want to get caught with Pacheco. You don't want to get caught with your pants down, theoretically, if Pacheco ends up coming back in like 6 weeks, right? Like, and I don't, again, broken fibula, like, I think players have returned within like 8 to 10 weeks. So I do think that there's possibility that he returns. So of course he's going to miss time. What I'm seeing, so here's what I'm seeing right now. Pacheco, sources say Pacheco is out between 6 to 8 weeks. So that's kind of what I was just saying. They're eyeing Kareem Hunt, which is also kind of what I was alluding to with the names that are on the list. And the Chiefs brought in Kareem Hunt today for a visit, I'm just seeing as well. So I think personally that Pacheco really does have a he does have the potential to come back, and if you have an IR spot, I do think that you're in good shape to put him there, because the reality with Pacheco is that when he does come back, like, he's obviously going to be a play in fantasy because he's on the Chiefs and because he's a really good player himself. It's an unfortunate situation. Right now, if you have room, I would put him on the IR, but also be willing to drop him. If you have, like, for example, like, if someone pulls a hammy next week and he's going to miss, like, a game or two, you're going to have to drop Pacheco and put that guy on the IR. So you have to be flexible about this one, but I would say for now, hold on to Pacheco. So that's going to do it for the night, guys. I appreciate y'all being in here tonight. Make sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel on your way out. Tomorrow's videos, wide receiver rankings and defense rankings. So make sure to stay tuned for those videos tomorrow.